live on the air. I'm Richard Saile.
This is wild.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of Lounge Time. I'm your host, Rich Saile, and on today's episode of 2026 Offseason Grades, we go over the Indianapolis Colts. They just made a recent signing within the last 24 to 48 hours, which made me want to do this team, and I have a lot to say on their offseason and what they need to do going into 2026, which I think is a big year for a lot of people down there for reasons I will get into when we start. So without further ado, let's begin the offseason grades analysis on the Indianapolis Colts. The big move that they did, and there wasn't really any big coaching changes on their side of the ball at all, but let's go with the player offseason moves. The biggest move they made was they retained Daniel Jones on the transition tag, 2 years, $88 million extension. Now, this is following the Achilles injury that he suffered late in November of last season. And I would just say, I get why they had to pay him. Because the going rate for quarterbacks is through the roof. I feel like this is a massive overpay on their part. And I understand why they had to do it, because Anthony Richardson has not panned out at all to be the guy they thought he was at 3rd or 4th overall back in 2023. And Phillip Rivers was old. They just needed somebody to improve that team, to make a late December push. It never worked out. It was never going to work out. And I get why they had to go with Daniel Jones, but he had a good start. But when they started to play the big boy teams like the Texans in Kansas City, they did not look good in November. You could see the signs were not looking too good for them. And even Jacksonville was really bad. Like that blowout game in Jacksonville, that was horrible. And that was the game where he suffered the injury. So there was nothing that was going to stop that sinking ship from going down to the bottom of the ocean, jokingly. Because that's the best comparison I can describe. I mean, this team was at one point the number 1 seed in the AFC last year. And it sunk down like the Titanic from when they started to play good teams in November, and they were about to get tested, and it all fell apart. Back to this Daniel Jones extension. I get why they had to do it. I understand that he was the best available option. They had a quarterback that they could have went. I don't think it's worth it for him, because he is going to, I don't know if he's going to put up that type of start again for him. And I know Shane Steichen is a very good play caller. I'm going to get into him more as we do this offseason analysis. But I think Daniel Jones, this was I don't want to say a panic move, but they needed to make sure they took care of him, because their big move after this, and we're going to get into it in just a few seconds, it was either Alec Pierce or Daniel Jones on the franchise tag, and I feel like they were going by the salary cap of, well, if we put Daniel Jones on the transition tag, we could save a little bit more money so we can keep Alec Pierce at a lower cap hit, which I understand that. I just feel like Daniel Jones, way big of an overpay for 2 years, considering now he's coming off an Achilles injury, and I don't know if he's going to regain the level that he once had last season to get him back into those early MVP talks last year before it all fell apart. Although I don't know why he was in MVP talks when it really should have been Jonathan Taylor, which we'll get into right after the Alec Pierce signing. So the next move they did was they signed Alec Pierce to a mega contract, 4 years at $116 million. He is now their number one wide receiver because Michael Pittman Jr. is gone to the Steelers in a trade for a 2026 sixth-round pick. They also gave up a seventh-round pick with Michael Pittman to the Steelers. So Alec Pierce is now your number one receiver. This is a worse receiver room than last year, and I'll get into the Keenan Allen signing in a little bit, but I do think this receiving core is one of the weaker halves of the league. I don't think Alec Pierce is a 1. He's a very strong 2, not a number 1. And I know he had the big play last year against the Texans when all the starters were resting for the playoffs. And he is a good player. He is. I don't know if he's a number 1 for this team right now. And I know people are going to say, well, Michael Pittman, what did he prove as a number 1? He was a solid number 1 receiver when Anthony Richardson was not what they thought of as the 3rd overall pick a couple years back. It's just Jonathan Taylor is their best player on offense. They're going to be a run-first team. But Pittman, I would say, was a solid number 1, not a great number 1, but he was solid. Got the job done. Okay? I don't know if Alec Pierce can step into that role and be a number 1 option. That's how I look at it. Speaking of that, Jonathan Taylor, they gave him a 2-year, $44 million extension with $39 million guaranteed. Well deserved. I like that it's short term because they're looking at it like we traded for Sauce Gardner at the trade deadline last year. We have our offensive core for the foreseeable future with Tyler Warren drafted last year, which I love that pick in the first round. Yeah, we had to get rid of Pittman, but we have Alec Pierce we paid. We got Steichen as a good offensive mind to put the offense in scoring position. Josh Downs is a decent 2, more of a 3, but he could be a 2. We're going to see. But we have the young core that we want to keep, and then we'll poke in defensively what they needed. The draft was big on defense, and the offseason was really big on defense, which we'll get into in just a moment. But Jonathan Taylor, they didn't overpay a big contract for him. He hasn't slowed down at all in play. And I liked him out of Wisconsin. I thought he was really good. Even 5 years ago, he was arguably the best back in football. And I think he is in that conversation with Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs. I think he's right there. And he hasn't slowed down yet. Knock on wood, he keeps performing at a high level because we don't really have a lot of running backs playing so great into their late half of their career other than Derrick Henry now, which feels like an outlier. And Adrian Peterson, if you want to go back the last 20-some-odd years, okay? But good, smart extension for Jonathan Taylor. I like that he's been balling, and he, knock on wood, has not had any major injuries. Defensively was where they were the most active. They lost Zaire Franklin and edge rusher Kwity Paye to free agency, but Arden Key, they picked up an edge. Nice, solid veteran. He'll get a couple sacks this season. Defensive tackles, Jerry Tillery, Derek Nandi, guys that have been veterans that have contributed in different ways. Nandi, Super Bowl champion with the Chiefs, so he's kind of their run stopper. Jerry Tillery's kind of that guy that does cause some disruption. Cam Taylor-Britt at corner, fell out in Cincinnati, but he knows Lou Anarumo's scheme on defense. Jonathan Owens, the safety, and then edge Michael Clemens from the Jets. And then defensively, they did draft Georgia linebacker C.J. Allen in round 2, one of my favorite players in the draft. I think he's going to be a great pick for them, inside linebacker. I really like C.J. Allen from Georgia. And then they got safety A.J. Halsey from LSU in the 3rd round, Bryce Betcher from Oregon, really good 4th-round pick they got from Oregon. I like that move. And then Caden Curry, the edge rusher from Ohio State in round 6. And then the other offseason moves they made, they brought back Mo Alley Cox at tight end, Nick Westbrook-Akiniyi, guy that's bounced around the league, mostly with Tennessee, decent depth at receiver. Okay? And then Deion Burks in the 7th round from Oklahoma. They added some line depth, Jaden Farmer from Kentucky at guard. It's good poking needs. And then you add Keenan Allen in the last 48 hours from free agency. He was with the Chargers for so many years. Good veteran to fill in as far as being that slot receiver that can play outside a little bit, but he's a good guy that knows how to get open inside the numbers, while Alec Pierce can work inside to outside, and then Josh Downs works the other half of the outside, and then Allen can work the middle of the field. He's had familiarity with Steichen going back to the days with the Chargers, and Jonathan Taylor is their anchor. So I like them filling in the gaps. But there are still holes on this roster I'm going to go into more that I'm not so confident in for the Colts to take that next step in making the playoffs. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. But I do like the moves they made, particularly on defense. They helped kind of lock that up. The only thing that hurt them was the first-round pick they gave up in the Sauce Gardner trade last year with the Jets. There were players out there in the first round I thought they might have gotten that would have benefited them better going into this year. I understand why they took a chance. Sauce Gardner's like 25 going into this month, which I can't believe, or 24. Like, he's got a lot of good football left. I know he's been deemed overrated by Jet fans. And I don't want to make that proclamation just yet. I want to give him a year with the Colts before I start seeing, okay, is there similar takes as far as him being overrated? I don't think he is yet. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that the Jets just did not have anything at all going for him. And again, I think he's still one of the top 10-ish corners in the league. He's definitely not in the top 5, if I'm being honest, but he's a solid corner that can contribute with Lou and Ramon. I've always liked him as a defensive coordinator going back to the Cincinnati days, especially those that have been lounge-time OG fans, to how well I was praising that Bengals defense before it all fell apart. Let's get to the roster as far as the depth chart. And I don't doubt that this offense will not be good. They are going to be scoring points. I do see some holes, though, that I say, let's pause and think where the holes in this roster are. I don't love this receiver depth. I think that it is a very thin room. I thought they could have maybe got somebody that was a little bit younger and more established as a 2 or a 1, because I feel like that's something that they needed to do. And again, I know they were never going to give up a big trade for like A.J. Brown. I get that, because they dished out so much money to Daniel Jones and Jonathan Taylor. They gave an extension to. Quentin Nelson's a stud on the inside of the offensive line. Okay, Sauce Gardner, they paid first-round pick for him. So I get that. But this is why that first-round pick could be beneficial when you look at the receivers that were there, and you would have been picking before teams in the 20s. That player could have helped that offense more than, again, there was corners out there too for where they were picking. I feel like that first round pick was a little bit of a detriment as far as what they could have added to this offense. And again, I like Alec Pierce. I don't know if he's a number 1. I think he's a solid 2 at best. Downs could be a 2. He's definitely a good 3. Keenan Allen is a nice veteran that's been around. He knows how to get open and work in the numbers. I just feel like they should have went a little younger for a more established receiver to kind of open it up a little bit. And I'm not saying I doubt Shane Steichen. I think he's a really damn good offensive play caller, and I know that they're going to score points this year. They're going to still be a great running game. They're going to be a good throwing team, above average. The offensive line, I'm not completely convinced outside of Quentin Nelson, because I feel like that losing Ryan Kelly at center was big, and Braden Smith at right tackle is a big loss too. Now you've got Jalen Travis at right tackle. You've got Matt Goncalves, Tanner Bortoloni. Bernhard, Raymond. Like, I don't know if these guys are ready to step into like big roles on this offensive line when your quarterback is just coming off an Achilles injury, and now you're paying him and Jonathan Taylor money when this offensive line feels like a work in progress to me. And that's where I have some concerns there. Looking at the receiver depth, Ashton Doolin, like, solid, but I don't know if he's going to be like a big contributor. Westbrook Akini has been a chain mover going back to the Titans days. Anthony Gold has been banged up a little bit. Okay, Deion Burks, Laquan Treadwell, way down on the depth chart. I just feel like they are solid, but there's gaps. And those gaps to me are bigger question marks than what they actually did. I'm not convinced on the offensive line outside of Quentin Nelson. I'm not convinced on this receiver depth for me to go, okay, they have a good enough team offensively that can challenge Houston defensively, which that's a different animal in its own. Their defense. I like their front seven. I think it's solid. I was not convinced early, and then I look at this roster and go, there's some players that can make a role right away and contribute. Arden Key, Grover, Stewart, DeForest Buckner, Laiatu Latu. That's a solid front four. It's not average, but it's not bad. It's a solid front four. It's above average, I'd say. Your depth of Tuamalu at edge. You have Michael Clemens being a rotational edge guy. George Gumbs Jr. is like the third string defensive end. Okay, Jerry Tillery at defensive tackle. Derek Nandi is a second string defensive tackle. Like, this front seven is deep. And I'm like, they could be solid. Especially if some of those guys behind the depth chart can be quality role players as far as developing. And this is a better front seven that I gave them credit for at the beginning when I was looking at everybody from early in the offseason. This is a solid front seven that could make some noise. Linebacker group isn't bad. You got two guys that know, well, Akeem Davis-Gaither is from Lou Anarumo's defense back in Cincinnati, so he knows the system. C.J. Allen and Bryce Betcher, I love those young guys. I'm curious if they're going to have a big snap count, and I think they're going to contribute well. I think they're going to need a couple games to get significant contribution, but I think these guys can definitely are good future pieces at the linebacker positions. I like those guys a lot for the way that Bryce Betcher is like a guy that sets the edge. He can decently rush the passer. He can stop the run. C.J. Allen's great in coverage, but he's a guy that hits the hole in the run game, and I like him a lot for both how he plays the run and the pass at middle linebacker. The secondary is where I look and say, okay, it's okay. Like, I'm not completely convinced there. Like, Sauce Gardner, I want to see a full year in Lou Anarumo's defense. I don't think he's overrated yet. I want to see. A.J. Halsey's a rookie at safety. He's going to need time to develop into that defense. Cam Bynum, solid player at safety. Charvarius Ward, who did good for them last season. And he's a good number 2 corner. He's just not a number 1. Justin Wally at nickel. And then their depth is not really strong there. And that's where, if they got a couple depth pieces in the secondary, I'd say, okay, I could see possibly them challenging for a wild card. They still can, but I would firmly say, okay, I would have them in the conversation as a 7 seed in the AFC. And when I look at the holes they have on offense too, I think the Colts are missing a couple depth pieces that, to me, if they add, I would feel comfortable about putting them in that top half of the AFC where they could challenge a playoff spot. I do like their front seven. I think their front seven is pretty productive. I think they're going to have guys that are going to be solid. Their depth of the defensive line is really strong, better than I gave it credit for. But their secondary is holes. And I feel like if there's a big injury in that position group, they're going to be in a little bit of a trouble group. And I'm not there yet. Like, Hunter Warler is a solid safety. I want to see a little bit more. Mekhi Blackman, he's solid at corner as a 4, but is he a starter capable, especially in nickel package? I don't know about that yet. And then a couple of these other guys like Jayante McMillan, Jalen Jones, Cam Taylor-Britt suspended for now, but I like him as sometimes a nickel, but he knows the Lou Anarumo scheme, so I think it's solid. So let's go to my big questions and why I think this is a big year for the Colts. Particularly, it's a big year for Chris Ballard because he made the move for Carson Wentz, it failed. He made the move for Matt Ryan, massively failed. Anthony Richardson, failed. Okay? The Colts have not made the playoffs since 2020. Okay? Philip Rivers worked out for 1 year. You have swung and missed badly on quarterbacks. Badly. Okay? You fired Frank Reich, which that team was going the wrong way. But it wasn't all Frank Reich. You just swung and missed on bad quarterbacks. Carson Wentz was solid for some part of the 21 season. And then it fell apart. And he was not a guy that could right the ship. Matt Ryan just got old, never was going to work out from the offensive line not protecting him well, and he just looked like his best days were past him. Anthony Richardson, for the 3 years that he's been there now going into year 4, he's not been worth the 3rd overall pick investment. He hasn't. And he's requested a trade, and they're not looking like they're going to trade him, so they're going to develop him. Although I wouldn't be shocked if a quarterback-needy team goes, all right, we were going to try to trade for him. And I feel like they might be asking too much for him. So, again, swung and missed bad quarterbacks. And then you look at where the Colts have been, right? Since we've gone to the 17 playoff in each conference, the Colts have been that one team that just missed it. 23, they had a chance to win and in against the Texans for the division, lost. 2 years ago, it was them in Denver for the 7 seed. They lost at Denver, which was the game to get them into the playoff. Lost that. And then last year, number 1 seed in the AFC for a good portion of the year, and then Daniel Jones gets hurt. And when they start playing good teams, it fails massively. If another year happens like this, I'm going to just say it. Chris Ballard is going to be done. I don't think it's fair to Shane Steichen because, let me just say this. Shane Steichen has gotten good success with Gardner Minshew. How he's been able to work with Anthony Richardson to be that close for a playoff spot makes me go, okay, he's not the problem. It's who they're putting at quarterback that they believe is getting over the hump. And Anthony Richardson hasn't worked out. All right? Daniel Jones, I'm not going to blame it on Steichen. That was just a freak injury that unfortunately happened. So we can't blame Shane Steichen for what's going on. And all this stuff I see with Shane Steichen being on the hot seat, guys, the Colts were not looking good before he got there. They are at least good on offense. Why would you get rid of the guy that at least has been the strength of this team as far as building a good offense? Chris Ballard's the real problem because draft classes have not been great lately, and I don't feel like he's done a great job within the last 5 years as a GM. I feel like it's fair to point that out. He's going to be the one, to me, that is going to take the fall and be out. I think Shane Steichen being on the hot seat is ridiculous. That Colts offense has not been the problem. And the quarterback development, if you want to blame him for the Anthony Richardson development, I don't think that's fair. I think that's Chris Ballard more so because it's been bad quarterback swing after bad quarterback swing. Daniel Jones is not a bad swing yet because he was good, and then when they played the good teams before the injury, they weren't looking great. Even when they played Jacksonville, that was just not looking great. So again, I don't want to say that's a bad swing yet. Let's see how this season plays out before we start going there. But again, the Shane Steichen hot seat talk stop. He deserves at least another year or two to develop. But it is not his fault. But this team has to make the playoffs this year. It's fair that the expectation is to make the playoffs. You can be one of the 7 teams in the AFC. You are in that conversation. It's just there are gaps that make me stop and think, I don't know if they're good enough to get to that wild card spot when you look at what everybody else in the AFC is. You got 2 teams in the East. The North has about 2 to 3 teams that are solid. The West in general is stacked. But 3 teams you could argue might make the playoff. That South has maybe 2. I don't know if I would say Jacksonville is in that category. I know they had a good year last year. They might be due for regression, but for the sake of this conversation, there's 2 to 3 solid teams in the South. There's 10 teams that have a legitimate argument for a playoff spot. Colts are one of them. But because the Colts have been right there at the door and have always been the one team that is out, looking in, and they can't get into the final 7 seeding, the expectation is, can you make a wild card spot at best, let alone win the AFC South over Houston? I don't know about that, but they can make a wild card spot. They got to just win the games against the teams they're battling with, and they got to make sure that they put this team in position to beat those teams to get in. Once you make the playoff, then it's making the additional moves and stuff. But Shane Steichen is a damn good coach to get them there. It's the roster building. Chris Ballard, to me, needs to be put on blast if this thing goes south, which I don't know. There's some holes on this roster that make me not as confident about them getting to a 7 seed. But I won't rule them out because Shane Steichen is a good offensive play caller, and they are capable of getting to that level. But with the injury to Daniel Jones coming back from an Achilles, it'll take time. I don't know how good it'll be, and now I'm seeing Tyler Warren injured his groin in practice, but I don't know the severity of it. I'm just seeing it now as I'm pulling up the Colts schedule. Speaking of the Colts schedule, they open up at home against the Ravens. I'm going to give them a loss because I don't like this matchup for them. I feel like the only good thing that they have going is Lou Anarumo knows Lamar going back to his days with Cincinnati. And Lamar's learning a new offense under Declan Doyle. This game will be close, but I'm going to give the Ravens the edge in Indianapolis. In Kansas City, this is going to be one of those games. Can you win Arrowhead? You didn't win there last year. I don't think they're going to win again. They're going to start 0-2. I believe they'll split with the Texans. I think they're going to win at home against the Texans. Washington overseas, that's a win. The Steelers in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh beat them in Pittsburgh last year. So the Steelers won at home against them, and it's in Pittsburgh. Now, if it was in Indianapolis, I'm taking the Colts. I'm going to say they lose at Pittsburgh because they haven't won there lately, although they should win that game, truthfully. The Titans, that's a win. At Minnesota, that's a win. I'm not sold on the Vikings at all. So we're looking at 4-3. At Jacksonville has been their house of horrors going back to the Carson Wentz win-and-in game 5 years ago. I'm going to say that's a loss. That's 4-4. Home for the Cowboys. No, that's a loss. We're going to go 4-5. Miami win 5-5. At Houston, 5-6. The Giants at home. I picked the Giants because I like the Giants better. They could win this game. I'm going to say they lose 5-7 going into the bye week. At Philly, 5-8. At Tennessee, they're a year away. I'm going to say 6-8. Home for the Bengals. Here we go. Another coin flip game. You got to win this one. I don't think they will. 6-9. At Cleveland, Jacksonville, I think the Colts sit at 8-9. I feel like there's a couple games that could get them into the 10-win range. Like at Pittsburgh, I could see. They could win week 1 against Baltimore. There's a chance. The Giants could be a chance. Maybe Cincinnati's a chance. Like, there are games, 3 to 4 games, that could put them in that 11-win range that I think will be enough to get in as a wild card in the AFC. I just don't think I don't feel as comfortable about them winning those games as I do those other teams and their concerns. So I think the Colts are going to be an 8-9 team. Chris Ballard's gone as GM. And I feel like this team isn't going to be as great in certain areas, especially with some of the roster holes in the secondary, receiver depth, offensive line, that I'm not as convinced with. Which leads me to my offseason grade. I am going with a C for the Indianapolis Colts. I'm going with a C. I think they did good addressing the defense. I like it. I'm a little skeptical giving Daniel Jones the extension following Achilles. Jonathan Taylor's extension is fine. I just think there's too many holes that I'm too worried about with this group. If you're going to be a team with the expectation of making the playoffs, either as a wild card or winning the South. And I don't think they're better than Houston right now. And I don't think they're better than 6, 7 teams in the AFC. And I've already graded most of them. I think there's one of those teams I haven't graded yet that's going to be next week that I believe is better than the Colts at this moment. But that is my 2026 offseason grade on the Indianapolis Colts. Make sure you guys hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, so that way you guys can get all the latest content. We are nearing the preseason episode where I will give my Super Bowl 61 matchup and winner and playoff teams. You don't want to miss that episode coming up late August, early September. You can also follow me at LoungeTime Pod on X. Yes, if you have a question for the show, I will answer it. All you got to do is just tweet at me and I'll answer it. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to Lounge Time. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. And I will see you guys in the next episode of 2026 Offseason Grades.